of the Blessed. The magical isle had refused to let her go otherwise. She'd believed the sacrifice was worth it, that she was free. Until she'd fallen from her horse at the castle gates, having curiously lost her grip on the reins, with Bellicent's voice in her head. The sorceress had followed her back from the other world, coiled quietly in her mind, waiting to take control. Instead of a grand homecoming, the royal guards had found her in a daze, bleeding and filthy from weeks on the road. Her courtiers now treated her like a madwoman, like an invalid instead of a queen. She had been gone for 4 months. Her husband, Yurien Vortigern, King of Lothian, Regent of Northumbria and Lord of the North, had thought her dead. She nearly had died in that frozen, cursed world. Her magic hadn't worked, and so she'd made a deal with the High Sorceress of Anwen. A deal that had gone horribly wrong. Below, in the castle forecourt, 2 guards marched past on patrol, and Morgana ducked down. She knew what they'd think if they saw her, that she was planning on hurling herself off the castle's gloomiest tower. A crowd would gather like they did for the hangings, taking pleasure in witnessing her literal downfall. Already, rumours nipped viciously at her heels whenever she walked amongst what had once been her adoring court. No one could know she was up here, just as no one could know of the hold Bellicent had over her and how time sometimes slipped through her fingers like sand. Bells rang out, marking the hour as 9 o'clock. Across the courtyard, she could see the flickers of candlelight in the fogged windows of the fortress's southern wing and smoke twisting from narrow chimneys in a futile attempt to warm the perpetually draughty castle. It was peaceful. Cosy, a quiet night in the last days before war, for it was clear what her husband was planning. He chafed at the idea that Arthur, a boy of 19, could be considered the rightful heir to all of England. If anyone should be named the High King, it would be him. Morgana had fallen in love with his ambition. She'd recognised the rage that steered him as a twin of her own. She couldn't remember the day when his bloodthirst had outpaced hers, just the slow realisation that motherhood had tempered her taste for violence. War wasn't for sorceresses. It was for men with something to prove, who hungered to take what didn't belong to them at the tip of a blade. She didn't crave war, or to rule over strangers from kingdoms that weren't her own. She wanted revenge against King Uther, who had taken her mother for himself and thrown Morgana away, exiling her in a convent when she was just a child. She wanted power she could use for herself, magic that would sing through her veins with promise. Carefully, she lowered herself down the side of the tower until she was standing on a narrow corbel. From here, she could almost reach the iron shutter bar of the tower window. Almost, but not quite. She was going to have to jump. She gathered her nerve, barely daring to breathe. For a terrible moment she was holding on to nothing, and then her fingers closed around the cold iron bar and her toes scraped the window ledge. She'd made it. She let out an incredulous laugh as she climbed through the window and back into the castle. She felt dizzy, and her stomach ached from emptiness as she descended the stone steps from the charred tower. She tried to remember eating, or getting ready for bed, but there was nothing, just a curious blankness. Dimly she could hear music and frivolity. She hoped that night's feast was still on the table. In her rooms, she threw on a billowing black dress and matching silk slippers and went down to the great hall. When she stepped through the large doors, the entire court paused to stare, then started to whisper. She caught her reflection in a serving platter and winced at the wild tangle of her hair, the fresh scratches on her cheek, the crust of blood on her knuckles. Still, such things shouldn't matter. She was a sorceress, a queen, their queen. So she held her head high, marching toward the table at the front of the hall where her husband sipped from a jewelled goblet as he surveyed his courtiers. The main course was picked over. Platters of wild game sat cold and